Myra. Mondays with Myra is always a delight. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Had a busy weekend.
Certainly, and it's especially here in Orlando, just the rainy and a little bit of chilly. So I was able to get some other things done. But I'm always excited to have these conversations with you because of your expertise and to introduce you to our audience and those that are going to be tuning in or that are with us live today. Go ahead and let us know where you're from, and you can go ahead and put in the chat where city you are coming in from. But I'm Dr. Jane Lacey. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I'm thrilled, as I just said, to be here with Myra, who will be leading our enlightened discussion on a topic that touches so many of us: anger responses to betrayal trauma, which is one of her expertise and her specialties. She has works with one-on-one clients, also has a support group for those that are overcoming betrayal trauma, because we know that betrayal trauma can often trigger just a powerful wave of anger. And we started this conversation last Monday and we're continuing it. And she's going to help us understand this natural response to that deep pain of trust that can shatter, and the expectations that were unmet. And a lot of people have experienced this, and coming through the holidays, we know it's a huge issue for a lot of people. And navigating this anger can be very, very challenging. And if it's not addressed appropriately, which Mara will talk to us about, it can lead to further emotional distress and just strained relationships in general. So I want to welcome Myra as she helps us transform our understanding of anger, turning it from a source of turmoil into a tool for healing and self-discovery. So welcome, Myra. So happy to have you here. And I think it'll be such a great topic to just start off by just helping us understand, as I mentioned, that anger is a natural response. But if you can break it down for us, like how natural is anger, especially when it comes to betrayal trauma?
Well, anger, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for giving me the time and opportunity. Um, it is a very natural reaction. Anger is a natural response. It comes up automatically for us. It's not like we plan to be angry. It just is an automatic response. Um, and, two things that we wished hadn't happened or things that we feel are unjust. It is a natural response. That does not mean just that it is a natural response, does not mean that it's the most helpful for us. It's helpful for us to understand that something is wrong that we need to pay attention to. I have seen betrayed partners get into some legal trouble because of their reaction. The anger isn't really helpful for them, even though it is a natural reaction. We want to move from reacting out of that anger to responding in a way that empowers and gives a voice to the person who has been betrayed. They say that anger is a secondary emotion. So under that anger that's showing up is some other kind of emotion that is really difficult to feel and express. So anger sometimes can feel like it gives us more power. It gives us a louder voice. It's Anger is a very strong emotion, and it actually lasts longer than the underlying emotions. Sadness, for example, tends to be more poignant than anger, but it does not last as long. There are 4 responses to betrayal and trauma. They are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And I'm going to share a little bit with you today about anger. We are born with a tendency to respond to any kind of perceived danger with one of these 4 reactions. If you're a person with the fight reaction, there are some things that we can do to help calm that down so you can move into a productive space for yourself.
You just said a couple things that I think it's important to highlight, but you talked about the 4 responses to betrayal and trauma. And you mentioned one that you said was fawn. What exactly is fawn for people who may not have heard that term before?
So fawning, it can be a really fine line because oftentimes when people have children, they do have to keep functioning. They have to provide the meals, they have to be able to engage, do the school homework. But fawning is really acting as if nothing has happened and going about your daily life and not acknowledging that trauma has happened. It's actually just going to everyday routines and kind of using those, maybe keeping busy in those, and not working through the actual trauma that has happened.
So it's almost like this big thing has happened, this big boulder has fallen in their house metaphorically, but they're just going about their life and their business and almost like putting it on the shelf. And it almost sounds like that survival almost to function,
Yes,
versus they're deliberately just don't want to deal with it. It's almost like this coping mechanism I'm hearing, like to just function with life.
correct. Yes.
So then with that being said, Myra, help us understand like what happens to our bodies and our minds so when we get angry. So we found out, that someone dear to us has betrayed us, and then that person in their mind when they're angry, I mean, how does that affect someone who's been betrayed or who is listening to us right now have this conversation, who's going through betrayal trauma, and she or he is going through something and it's affecting how they're thinking, it's affecting how they feel in their body. I think it would be helpful to help us understand what would be considered, or what is happening for us and our bodies and our minds when we get angry.
Right. So the first thing you might notice is you might notice that our bodies start to shake, or we feel like this energy going to our extremities. Sometimes we get weak in the knees. Sometimes, if we're in the freeze response, we can just kind of go into like a shock state. Anger in particular will send energy to our jaw. And I know if you notice, like when people get angry, sometimes you'll see them clench their jaw. That's just a natural response to being angry. We become motivated and focused. It does decrease our creativity, our rationality, our logic, our reasoning, and clarity, all which would be helpful for us to heal. The other thing that happens, to heal from the anger and to just kind of calm down. But it's so that we can be focused, because it's a survival mechanism that is built into our body, right? Animals have it, we have it. It's so that we can survive. And so our heart rate will increase, our blood pressure will go up, our sometimes we'll start sweating. And those are very natural reactions to anger. So it's really helpful for us to kind of calm that natural reaction down so that we can think clearly, so that we can, even when people are angry, sometimes they'll say things that don't make sense. And it's because that limbic state has taken over and we're not thinking with logic. The anger is kind of directing what we're doing.
Well, that's very, very helpful, because I think a lot of times when people are feeling this in their body, they get into this reactive state and it could affect, how they're functioning at any point in time. And I know that as therapists, we can understand this, but I know a lot of times people will look at someone who has gone through betrayal trauma, and there's this tendency to tell them, right, to just get over it. Like, why are you still holding on to this anger? Like, it happened 2 years ago, it happened a year ago, or it happened 10 years ago, whatever the story may be. And we can see, sometimes it can frustrate friends and family if that person is still what they perceive as angry, based off of what has happened in their life. So what would you want to share with us, or some of the reasons that people don't want to give up on their anger? I mean, what can you share with us to give us some insight to that?
So sometimes we think things should have been different, or they should be different. And that always leads to frustration, because we cannot change anything that has already happened. Sometimes people believe that if they are not angry, it means that what the other person did was okay. So we feel like we have to be angry for them to, not get away with something. But to really understand that, I know for me personally, somebody else being angry isn't what I use to figure out whether I've done the right thing, or us making ourselves angry and being upset isn't the thing that's necessary to hold them accountable. Sometimes people believe that their anger keeps the other person on the hook for what they did, or they may believe that the anger protects them and keeps them from getting hurt. But oftentimes it makes them more vulnerable, particularly if they are the ones that are getting arrested for their reaction to what happened. So each of these reasons we explore in counseling to understand that maybe anger really isn't serving them the way that they think it is.
And I think that's part of why many people should receive some help when they're navigating betrayal trauma, because sometimes we can't be a prophet in our own life and we don't realize that there are ways of which we can move through, almost like that passing train can move through us and doesn't have to take residence in us, because we don't necessarily can see how it could be hurtful to us. So with that being said, Myra, I think what somebody may be listening to us and they're thinking, well, when I hear anger, I'm not the one who's tearing down, I'm being dramatic, tearing down the curtains and throwing dishes and all that stuff and letting my partner know how much they hurt me. So I think it's also a good information to share. I mean, how many kinds of anger are there? I mean, what can you share with us about that?
Well, anger shows up differently for different people. So I offer an assessment that has 11 different types of anger. Some of them are resentment, moral anger, habitual anger, if we have a habit of being angry and reacting in an angry fashion, fear based anger, anger turned against ourselves. Sometimes we get really angry at ourselves for things that somebody else has done, and passive aggressive anger. And those are just a few. Once a person finds out what kind of anger they are experiencing, there are steps to better understand yourself and then a path to overcome and resolve that anger.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I think a lot of people can hear of that aggressive anger and that passive aggressive anger, but to understand that there's also, as you mentioned, the fear-based, moral, and resentment, and depending on the person, it's going to come out in different ways. So then
Right.
what can you share with us that are the steps that can help someone with their anger? So they're listening to our conversation and they're like, you know what? That's me and it's time to get some help. What can be some things that you can share with that person right now?
So, the first thing that I do in counseling is some rapid resolution therapy to try to help calm down the nervous system and help the person out of the crisis, because often it is a big shock and their nervous system has gone haywire and they just need some real quick ways to calm that system down. So, I use rapid resolution therapy for that. The second thing I do is I teach them about anger and anger management. I provide some education on anger and what other options they have besides getting angry to deal with this trauma that has come up for them. The next thing I do is I teach DBT skills, is dialectical behavior therapy, which is learning about self-soothing, self-regulation. I teach mindfulness to learn how to control our thinking. And then I use distress tolerance and emotional regulation. And then lastly, interpersonal effectiveness, so that when they are communicating, they're effective in what they're saying. Another component of managing anger is learning how to set boundaries. And so I have a whole segment on how to set boundaries, which ties into our expectations, whether they're realistic or not, whether the other person, what we're expecting. We have to learn that we can't control the other person, but we can learn ways to manage ourselves when our partner is going through their own struggles. In betrayal trauma, the very person that has hurt us is the person that we have been closest to and who we feel like we want to run to and say, help us through this hurt that you've caused us. We feel like they should be responsible. This often is not possible because they're not in a place where they're able to do that. They're dealing with their own stresses and their own trauma, and they aren't the person that is most helpful for us in that moment. So they're really needing to get their own counseling, work through their own side of why the betrayal happened.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. So along that vein, are there any like tips that you can give to someone that's out there right now and they're feeling like, as they're listening to this and they're thinking about the betrayal that they experienced in their life, that anger is just coming up for them? I mean, what can you share with that person that anger may be coming up for them in this moment as they're listening to us?
So, the first thing that we can recognize is that the opposite of anger would be calmness. So, we have to practice keeping ourselves relaxed and calm. Our thinking can drive our ability to relax. So, we have to pay attention to what we're thinking about and how we're thinking. Oftentimes, we will ruminate, which is just replaying things over and over in our heads and making ourselves angrier. So, it's helpful to stop ourselves when we're aware that we're replaying things in our mind and think of things that will be helpful or relaxing. Sometimes ruminating or replaying scenarios can be a way of thinking that we have done for years. And so it takes practice to switch that type of thinking off. We have to practice interrupting our thinking. We also can tell ourselves, I'm only going to think about something for 15 minutes in order to come up with a solution. And if I'm not thinking about a solution, I'm going to force myself to stop thinking about it. And then find things that you can think about or actions you can take, like exercising, to take your mind off of that thought process. It takes practice to figure out what that actually is that you can do in that moment and practice interrupting the thinking. With trauma, we have to recognize that our unconscious mind does not know the difference between us thinking about it and it actually happening. So sometimes we're re-traumatizing ourselves with the thinking. That's why it's so helpful to change our thinking pattern. One other comment about ruminating. One suggestion to reduce anger has been to walk away and count to 10, but they have found that for somebody who ruminates, that generally doesn't work, because as they're walking away counting to 10, they're adding the reasons that they were angry to begin with to, like, 1, you did this, and 2, you did this. So the reason they say to count to 10 is because numbers actually work a different part of our brain than the part of our brain that gets triggered and angry. So something that actually might be more helpful than saying walking away and counting to 10 to somebody that ruminates would be to say, sit down and do a math problem. That might be more helpful. So when you find yourself getting angry, consciously try to soften the muscles around your eyes, soften your tone, tighten a few muscles and relax them, particularly your shoulders, your fist, your jaw, and then lastly, think relaxing thoughts. You have to get to know yourself 100% and know what works for you. So you have to try different things until you find the ones that work for you. Sometimes it's breathing, sometimes it's muscle relaxation, but you just have to try all different things to get yourself to relax. You can learn to moderate yourself. See if when you get angry the next time, you can decide to be a little less angry. Like if you think of a thermometer and a scale of, like, how angry am I? What's the word at the very top? Was it, rage? And if it is rage, can I bring it down to maybe like moderate anger, and just try to reduce it in the moment? So you can decide to be a little less angry when you're in the middle of feeling angry, and that takes practice, right? Sometimes anger shows up in couples counseling, and there are many reasons for this, but ultimately we want to be able to have productive conversations that lead us to healing.
Well, that's such good information. I mean, you shared a lot there that was so helpful to that person. And you can watch this on replays. You're listening to Myra's advice for us on Monday. But one of the things that you had mentioned, and I do think it is really important to comment on, because you mentioned about having productive conversations that lead to healing. But when that anger is going, and the reptilian brain or rationale, all that stuff goes out the window, and you just want to, like, claw out the person's eye, so to speak, that hurt you metaphorically. So with that being said, and you mentioned couples counseling, like, would you recommend couples counseling, like, right away after a couple has gone through betrayal? And this will be my last question. I know we covered a lot of stuff, but I wanted to ask that one last question in case someone's listening and they're thinking about, what, I've gone through betrayal, or, I just found out my husband or my wife or someone is doing something that's hurting me or hurting my relationship, but they haven't made that decision yet. I mean, what could you tell them?
I would recommend individual counseling to be able to learn the skills to self-soothe, self-control, self-regulate, along with interpersonal skills so the communication between you and your partner can be the most effective. And then make sure that the counselor that you're seeing understands betrayal trauma and anger responses and attachment styles. There's a process for healing from betrayal, and couples will reach a point where couples counseling will be very beneficial, but they need some basics and some personal healing of their own before I think that will be the most effective. One component that we can talk more about is attachment styles, because that does so much impact the way that we relate to our partner, the way that we communicate, and the way that we heal and bond from trauma.
Yeah, so there's a lot of great nuggets and great advice, and I always appreciate having these chats with you on Mondays with Myra, because in these sessions there is someone who's going to pick up something and they're going to realize that they're not alone. So before we go on with our President's Day, what can you share as far as resources for someone that may want to, outside of individual therapy, that maybe you offer? Is there anything that you can share with us?
Yes, I offer betrayal trauma support groups, and I offer them both in person and by telehealth. And it is a great resource because it works solely on the person who has been betrayed. So often when we're facing betrayal trauma, the emphasis is put on the person who has betrayed, and we're trying to figure out what went on with them, what they were thinking, why that happened, the communication. But really the person who has been hurt the most has been left, on their own. And so betrayal trauma support group is really helpful, because not only do you realize you're not alone, but you hear things that the other people are going through and how they're handling it. And then we walk through all the skills so that you are able to figure out what does work best for you. And then also understand some of the writings and authorities in this that can provide additional resources. So sometimes we have extra books that we go through on trauma bonding and different things like that that show up in the group. So it is really helpful. I found that people have really found it to be a good resource.
And you said it. I think it's important for people to realize they're not alone. And sometimes if they are the one who's been betrayed, and as you mentioned, more of the focus is put on the person, well, you go get counseling, you go get help. And then they can almost have that carried shame where they're not necessarily maybe sharing with people who can really help them. So to be in that support group and to be around people who have walked and been in your shoes or can support you. And I know a lot of times with support groups is that these become your lifelong friends, because you're going through such a very, very important healing journey. So we certainly appreciate the work that you're doing with betrayed partners and getting in the trenches with them in your support group, as well as with your trauma counseling and helping them move through it in a way that they know that they're going to be okay and that they're not alone. So we appreciate you, Myra. So any final comments or thoughts for those that may be listening?
I think the only thing I can say is take the initiative, and really, it really takes strength to be able to reach out and do the groups. I know sometimes people are afraid to do that. They're afraid they might know somebody in the group. They're afraid to share their story. They're afraid to talk about it. And it really is a safe space where everything is confidential and the group is tight knit, and it is so very helpful. So sometimes it just takes that extra push for yourself to get yourself moving in that direction.
Well, you heard it here. Myra said it takes strength to reach out and get help. It is not a weakness. So exercise your muscles today. So if there's something that you heard that you resonated with, or maybe it's your friend, or maybe it's someone that you're thinking about, to share this resource and let them know that Myra has a resource in her betrayal trauma support group to help you move through it. So until next Monday, we will see you soon.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you, Myra.